Okay, looks like we're about to kick off. Good afternoon, and thanks for coming to my session. So this is a session on OpenID Connect and OAuth with Azure AD and ADFS, specifically ADFS in Server 2016. So I hope that's what you're here for. So my name's Rory. I am an identity architect at Datacom, and I work across the Microsoft identity stack. The key message that I'd like you all to take away from the session today. Now, you saw in the key message I used the phrase modern authentication. So what is modern authentication? So modern authentication is where we're using REST APIs, which are based on JSON, rather than SOAP APIs, which are all XML. It's all about the user consenting. So you know those flows, you give permission for some of your attributes and things to be passed over, rather than an admin deciding for you. And it's very much API based. Some of the things that we're going to be talking about today, we're obviously going to have a little bit of an overview on Azure AD and ADFS. We'll look at OpenID Connect and OAuth. We'll look at the protocols, the stacks that we're going to use, some of the use cases that you'll find when you're trying to use this, and we'll do some demos. So how many people here actually configure Azure AD? So quite a few hands. And how many people here configure ADFS? Ah, even more hands. Excellent. How many of you have looked at Server 2016 in ADFS? One. Oh, quite a few. Oh, cool. More than I thought. All right, so here's a Microsoft slide. Azure AD, for those of you that are not that familiar, is basically identity management as a service. 90% of Fortune 500 companies use it. There's over 10 million Azure AD tenants, 750 million user accounts. But the really interesting figure is on the bottom right. Every day, 1.3 billion authentications on Azure AD. That's quite a startling figure. And a lot of that is obviously driven by Office 365, because Office 365 is sitting on top of Azure AD, even if you didn't realize it. If we look at ADFS, this is a Microsoft slide about how you get from ADFS to Azure. And you'll see, in terms of driving up into Azure, 50% of the authentications into Azure AD are coming from ADFS, 48 million. Ping Federator is the nearest at 1.6 million, so it's way ahead. So Azure AD and ADFS, they're both identity providers. They both generate tokens. They both have SAML or JSON tokens. It's up to you. You can decide. Inside the token is a set of claims, which is a set of attributes about the person who authenticated. They can do WS Federation. They can do SAML. And the stuff we're going to talk about today is OpenID Connect and OAuth. What's the difference? Well, ADFS is on-premise. It's got a very rich set of claims rules that you can use to augment. You can still hook software as a service applications up, but you have to do it individually. And you can sync all your stuff up to Azure AD. Azure AD is obviously clouds-based. There aren't any claims rules at the moment, so the tokens that you get are canned. You can't really influence them much. The software as a service applications is 2,800 at the moment that you can basically integrate with Azure AD literally with a few mouse clicks. And obviously, it's the bedrock of Office 365. So let's have a look at what the world looked like before OAuth. So think about application A there, and application A is Facebook. Now you've got an application B that you want to use, and they want to get some of the Facebook attributes. So the way it used to work was application B said to Facebook, hey, here I am. I don't know how to get into you. And it would tell the user, and the user would literally pass his username and password to application B, and application B would then go and get whatever it wanted. So think about that. You've given your Facebook credentials to another application. Do you know anything about that application? Is it a secure application? What can they do with your credentials? They can sell them. They can do anything they want with your Facebook account now. The other problem is you might have 30 of these applications. That means when your password changes, you've got to go to 30 different applications and change your password. So it wasn't a very good system. And that's why OAuth came along. So what happens in OAuth is you authenticate over here, and you get a token. The token is proof of your authentication. application B only gets the token. It never, ever sees your credentials. Okay, so this is RFC 6749. This is the one that originally described OAuth. And you can see it's all written in ASCII art, which kind of shows you how old it is. And just for some of the terms, imagine you've got some photos up on the internet and you want to print them out. So you have an end user, which they call a resource owner, wanting to go to a printing service, which they call a client. The photo sharing service is going to provide the photos, and they call that a resource server. And then you need an authorization server, which is for authentication. So OAuth was fine, and huge improvement on handing out your passwords, but it had a problem. It was only designed for consent. It is not an authentication protocol. So Facebook, Google, Twitter, everybody else built their own version of how to use OAuth for authentication. If you're a developer and you've suddenly got 25 different ways of doing something, it's a real pain. So the industry all got together. They said, there's got to be a better way. So they developed OpenID Connect. So OpenID Connect is a standard way of using OAuth for authentication. And you can see on that slide, OpenID Connect is for user authentication, and OAuth is for user consent. OpenID Connect verifies the person. OAuth accesses the person's attributes. So there's quite a clear line between the two. So if you look at them in a kind of a stack layer, OpenID Connect specifies how to use OAuth to communicate identity data. And it sits on top of your standard OAuth stack. There's a number of tokens. One of the problems that OAuth has, it's got all these tokens, but there's nothing that actually tells you about the user. So when they introduced OpenID Connect, they added a new token, the ID token, and the ID token tells you stuff about the user. OAuth has got all the access tokens, and then there's also a thing called a refresh token. So why do we need a refresh token? The access token only lasts typically for 60 minutes. So if your user's in an application, at the end of 60 minutes, what happens? The token expires, the user has to re-authenticate. That isn't a very good user experience. Pretty much sucks, basically. So what happens is, under the hood, you have a look. If your token's about to expire, you pass the refresh token. That's proof of authentication. That gives you a new access token. The next hour, you do the same thing. So the refresh token allows you to get a new token without having to pop up a login screen. We have a number of endpoints. We have an authorized endpoint, so that's the endpoint you go to, obviously, for a login and a password. We have a token endpoint, which is where you go to get the token. We have a discovery endpoint, so if you're familiar with WS Federation or SAML, you'll know all about metadata. The metadata in OpenID Connect is called discovery. And there's a user info endpoint, which you can use to get information about the user. There's a number of flows in OAuth and OpenID Connect. I'm not going to go into them because they'll just bore you. The two that we're going to look at today are the authorization code grant. So that's one where you authenticate, you get a code, you send the code, you get a token, you send the token to a resource. And that's very good for browser stuff, right? So you've got server to server at the background, but you do have some kind of browser in the front end. Client credentials is one that we use for server to server. So there's no user interaction in that flow, right? It's just server to server, daemon to daemon. So we don't really need a login and password. That one uses a secret key. If you know the secret key, it proves you've authenticated. It proves you have the right to use the web API. Implicit grant is for single page applications, very much JavaScript bound. That is good for authentication, but you don't get the secret key because obviously JavaScript, you can get in and find out what the key is. Resource owner, I don't see many people using that. That's one where you actually pass the username and password. And a hybrid is kind of building two together where you get an ID token as well without having to do an extra round trip. So basically, just to reiterate, you go to the authorized endpoint, you get a token, you use that to get the token, you send the token to your endpoint, and away you go, doing whatever you want with that resource. This is an ADFS slide from Ignite in Atlanta. So OAuth got the authorization code grants, great for mobile apps. We've got the resource owner for scripting and so on. Implicit flow, single page applications. OpenID Connect, like I said, it's great for browsers. OAuth OBO, which stands for on behalf of. You could use confidential client for that. And ID tokens, you could use your customizable tokens. So a lot of people have asked me, what flows do I use in what kind of use cases? So here's quite a nice little write-up that kind of describes it. So the first thing you have to decide, is this server to server or is a human involved? If it's just server to server, you can use confidential client. If it's a user, you have to make some decisions about what kind of user interface. Is it a web app? Just go and use authorization code grant, which is the typical one that you use. If it's a user agent, in other words, it's JavaScript, you have to decide if it's the first or a third party. First party is trusted, third party isn't, and then it's either password or implicit grant. If it's a native app, so a native app is something that does not have browser functionality, doesn't have redirect capabilities. So it would be a mobile device, it would be WPF, it would be a command line, desktop application. Again, native app could either be third party or first party, depending on the flows that you want. Okay, so you can actually get Visual Studio to do this for you. The way you do that is you go into Visual Studio, you pick an MVC project. On the right, you'll see it's got change authentication, so you pick cloud, single organization. You pick work and school account, and that's the tenant that you're going to use. This takes a bit of time to run, so I'm not going to run through. I'm just going to show you the slides, and then we can have a look at the project that it builds. In that drop-down, there's also a thing called on-premises. That's how you talk to ADFS, and we'll get back to that a little bit later. Okay. So, sorry, let me just... okay, sorry. We've got two stacks in OpenID Connect. We've got Owen, which is a package that does the OpenID Connect stack. And we've got ADL. So ADL is a library that essentially is a wrapper around OpenID Connect. So Owen is pure protocol because it's the Owen package for OpenID Connect. ADL is a wrapper around the protocol. The protocol is currently OpenID Connect, but you're not supposed to know that. They could change the protocol tomorrow. It's simply a set of wrappers. So here we have a fairly old slide. Above the red line, you'll see protecting the resources. So that's where you get your Windows Identity Foundation and your OAuth and .NET Core at the bottom, at the top. And then on the right, you'll have all the ADL stuff. So you can see that's all about requesting tokens. This is an old slide that says ADL 3 is in preview. Actually, it's in GA. We've got an ADL library, which is multiple platforms. Works on .NET, Windows Store, Universal Windows Program, iOS, Android, Node, Java. It's open source. It's for Server 2016 and Azure AD. So ADL is not a protocol library. It's a set of wrappers, and it works with ADFS and Azure AD only. So it's not a protocol library. It's only written for those two. It may work with other identity providers, but there's no guarantee. So ADL.NET is works with ADFS and Azure AD. Current version is version 3. That version's been replaced by Microsoft Authentication Library, MCEL. It's a converged model. Converged model means at the moment you're going to do, when you log into Azure, it says Microsoft account, or it tells you work on home. You have to pick one, and then it goes through. In the converged model, you just authenticate, and it sorts it out behind the scenes. And it's a unified library. So the reason that I was looking so confused earlier is that these are not the latest slides, which is a bit of a problem. There were supposed to be some demos there that kind of didn't make it. What I might just do, and I apologize for this, if you can very
Could you just do something maybe on this laptop?
yeah. So I apologize, but that's why I stopped for a while and I looked so confused because that wasn't what I was expecting to see. Just check if that's the latest one. Can I just go down a bit? You see there's, so there, oh no, it's okay, we can probably just run with this. Let's run with it. It's not huge differences. Yeah, we'll just run with this.
Okay.
So sorry, there's not huge differences. There was a demo that I added and I didn't do the demo because, yeah. Okay, let's not worry about it. That's a hidden slide. So we were here, yeah, we'll leave it for now and I'll go over to my thing. So apologies for that. All right, so what I was supposed to do when I can log in. All right, so what happens when we do, I showed you using the stuff in Visual Studio and the change authentication. The code that it generates is the ON code. So you'll see here we're talking about cookie types. And then we'll say use OpenID Connect authentication and the options. And these are the OpenID parameters. If you were going to use WS Federation, you'd say use WS Federation authentication. If you were going to use SAML, you'd say use SAML authentication. If we go and look in the web.config over here, what you'll see is you'll see client ID and AD instance and the client secret and so on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run this. So what happens when you click next, next, next inside Visual Studio, it goes and downloads this template, which has got that code that you've just seen. It downloads all the NuGet packages that you need, all the OWIN packages and everything. It goes off to Azure AD. It creates the application for you. It creates client IDs. It creates secret keys. It brings all that information down, and it puts it into your web.config. So you don't have to do anything, right? Out of the box, it just does everything for you. Takes a bit of time. So what we got here, if I go off to my Azure page just to log in, and if you know Auckland, that's Long Bay because I live near there. So I'll just log in over here. Okay, so it's working. I'm not really interested in the application. It's more about what it's doing on the wire. So let's just wait for that. If I go and look. Come on. So while it's doing all that stuff, I will go and look in over here. So this is the application that it created automatically for me in Azure AD. If I look in the properties, you will see there is your client ID is over here, your redirect URL is over here, and if I look in the keys, you will see these are the secret keys that we need. So all of this was created by Visual Studio. I didn't have to do anything. Okay, so it's all done. Let me just go back to Firefox. Okay, we've got the application, we've authenticated. Now there's a little Firefox add-on called SAML Tracer. And if I just go to where, if I can just find this one here. All right, so I'm just going to blow that up for you. So this is the command that we sent. Just bear with me. All right, that's the command. You'll see here, there's the authorized endpoint I spoke about. Here's your client ID over here, etc. All that stuff was done. So that's the command that went, and then we authenticated. And then what comes back in this post, just bear with me so I get the right one. And I look in the parameters. What I'll see here is the code that we're going to use and the ID token. And we're going to look at that a little bit later. So you can see that's what's happening under the hood. Authorize, get the code, send the code, go to your resource. All right, so that's that little demo. Now, the next one on the slides is the NuGet Package Explorer, which is not quite the one that I wanted. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to divert from the slides. And how many people here use Postman? Ah, awesome. Lots of people use Postman. So Postman is something that runs in Chrome. It's an app. They have a sense of humor. And this is what you see when you load Postman up. Okay, so Postman has a set of scripts that you can write. I've got a few scripts in the collection. We've got some public endpoints here. Right, so these are scripts. This is the metadata one. If I just load that, if I show you what that looks like. So this is what the metadata looks in OpenID Connect. It's a well-known OpenID configuration. And when I run that, you get back a whole lot of stuff. So you get back keys and issuers and response types and grant types and the scopes that are supported and the claims. Basically, anything you want to know about OpenID Connect is in that endpoint. There's also one that gives you the keys, which is this one, Discovery Keys. And when you send that, so this is going to my server 2016. You can't do this with the other ones. You'll see it gives you the tokens. So in terms of ADFS, we have ADFS 2 and downwards. There's no OpenID Connect. There's no OAuth2. ADFS 3, they have confidential client. There's a little bit of there. There's no OpenID Connect. There's a little sliver of OAuth. In Server 2016, it is a full stack. It is the same stack that's in Azure. Okay, so whatever you can do in Azure, those 4 profiles that I showed you, authorization code, go on to implicit confidential client, resource owner password, those are all in ADFS now. So pretty cool stuff. How did I do that in ADFS? If we go and look at the box, you'll see, for those of you who haven't looked at it, there's a whole lot more endpoints, and there's scope descriptions. So scopes are permissions, essentially. So over here, these are the default ones. User impersonation, use OpenID Connect, send me my email back, send me my profile back. You can add your own scope. So if your business requires scopes, permissions, whatever you want, you can add them here. And then I'll show you how you add them into your application. So you've got the scopes there. And over here, you've got application groups. So if you click application groups, you've got add application group here. So you can see, let me just expand that for you. Down the bottom. So you can do a native and a web API. You can do a server and a web API. Or you can do native server or web API on their own. So it's just different wizards allowing you to configure the parameters that you need to do the stuff that basically let me do what I did earlier. Okay, so if we go and look at, let me just close this down. If we go and look at this one, so you'll see, again, we have the client ID, we have the redirect URI, and down here are the client secret keys. So that's for a website. You just, again, type in stuff. So there's no wizard at the moment that does, you know, how we used Visual Studio and went off to Azure. There's no wizard that does anything for ADFS. Everything that you do here, you have to configure manually at the moment. All right, if we go and look at the OpenID Connect web app, you'll see we've got 2 parts. We've got the web app and the web API. If I just look in the web API, you've got identifiers, you've got the access control policy. So this is another difference with Server 2016. You can do this in ADFS in that middle issuance transform one, but you have to write the claims rules. What happens in these ones is it actually has a little kind of wizard language, and you can basically say, these groups, intranet only, multi-factor required. So you're basically just ticking buttons, and it's building up the claim rule dynamically for you. So you don't have to go and write these really complicated claims rules. So that's a pretty cool feature. So it's got that. And it's also, if I just go back here, it's also got, so these are the claims rules that you're all familiar with if you've done anything with ADFS. And then you've also got client permissions. So remember when I talked about the scopes? You've added some scopes in that other section. This is where you tick them to say, if you don't have the scope, you cannot call this web API. So you add scopes, the scopes that your business requires, and over here you say, this is the one that you have to have. That's what your business has mandated. All right, so that's cool. So if I now go back to Postman, so now you've seen that, and I go to the public one here. So authorization code grant, the authorization request. Over here, you can see this is going to go to the authorize endpoint over there. Now, Postman only does web APIs, all right? And for this to work, because this is all browser-based, this is the first part of your flow, you have to put this into a browser. So I'm just going to put this into a browser for you. Just bear with me. So now it is going to go off to ADFS, as you noticed. So this is ADFS. So I had this built on TP5, which is the version before RTM. So this is pretty close. There weren't many changes in RTM. So you can see it's an ADFS screen, and you can see it was an OpenID connect command. So, and let me just type in the password. Oh, sorry. I've got the wrong one here. Yeah. Now, I'm not worried about the fact that the site can't be, because I don't actually have a thing on my machine. What I want is the code, because I need the code for my next command. So remember I said you get the code back? So if we just go over here into, I just want to paste the thing here so I can get it out easily. So I want that bit of, that's the code, right? Now I go back to Postman, which is over here. And I go to the next one, so you'll see this is going to the token endpoint. And I have some parameters. I've got client ID, scope, everything. Here is the code that I'm going to substitute, and I'm going to send that. And what you'll see here is I'm going to get back an access token, a refresh token, and an ID token. Now this is all gobbledygook, right? I mean, it's not exactly the most easy thing in the world to read. But there's a really cool, some of you may have heard of AllZero. AllZero do some amazing stuff in the identity world. They have written a thing called jwt.io, and you can take your token and you can put it in here, and you'll see suddenly, magically, it transforms into English. So the top part here is all about the keys. Those are the key descriptors that are used to sign it. And the bottom part is actually the payload of what's in the token. So if I just blow that up for you a little bit. So what you've got here, this is your audience. This is when it was issued at. That's when it expires. That's the time. That's the sub. That's my user GUID. And ADFS uses GUIDs for some reason in 2016. The UPN and the unique name, right? So you can actually see this stuff. There's quite a few of these on the internet. This is just one of them. It's the one I like using. And OAuth do some incredible stuff. And if you want to know anything about libraries, just go further down there. And like every library on the planet is there, and it tells you how to use them. So if we go back to Postman now, right, we've got that. Now I've got a bit of code behind Postman to do the user info. So now I'm taking that token, I'm passing the token to the user info. User info will give me information because the token proves that I've authenticated. If I send it now, ADFS will return the user info. In this case, it's just the sub. Azure AD returns quite a lot more. So you can see from that little demo, we've done the whole authorization code grant flow through Postman to ADFS Server 2016. So yes, it is there, and yes, it does work. If we look at the confidential flow, which we talked about a little bit earlier, you'll see that it doesn't go anywhere near the authorization endpoint. It's only going to the token endpoint. There's no point in going to authorization endpoint because there's no user. So you couldn't authenticate even if you wanted to. So we go to the token endpoint, and you see in the body we have a client secret. If we send that, again, we get the access token back. So that's just, the other one was three different flows. This one is just the one flow. So we're getting the access token done, and that's server-to-server stuff. Okay, so we've done all that. Now I am going to go back to the slides, and I've kind of diverged a bit, I'm sorry. I'm just trying to put it all together in some meaningful manner. Now we talked about ADL, and we talked about all the different things that it supports, .NET and iOS and Android, normal .NET Core. There's a really cool tool called the NuGet Package Explorer. You can go and get it on NuGet. It does wonderful stuff with NuGet. Okay, so if I go here and say, open a package from an online feed, so it whizzes off. You can do all kinds of things. Really have a look at it. It's a really nice... Oh, sorry. My apologies. All right. So all I did was basically go off to NuGet. Okay, so let's go look at the ADL package. All right, I want this one, which is the Active Directory. All right, when I expand the lib over here, you'll see inside your ADL package what you get. Is you get, it's all portable class libraries, so there's one for Android, one for .NET 4.5, one for .NET Core, one for Xamarin. So your ADL package has everything in it, and it basically binds up when you run it. Okay, so that was cool. Now if I go back to my slides, so that was the demo of the NuGet Package Explorer. Okay, so let's talk about use cases. There's a number of authentication scenarios that you can have. Top left, you've got the browser, and you've got JavaScript. That can call a web application. That web application can call a web API. Bottom left, you've got native apps and servers. They can call web APIs, and that is web APIs can call other web APIs. Okay, so those are the typical use cases that we come across in the authentication world. If I now take the protocols and overlay the protocols on top of that, what you see is this. So top left, where you had the enterprise stuff in the browser, that's where your WS Federation, that's where your SAML, that's where your OpenID Connect lives. All the rest of it is OAuth. And that's why Microsoft has put so much effort into doing OAuth on Azure AD directory and on ADFS, because everything else is pretty much OAuth. Okay, so I've done that token. Sorry, I said the slides are a bit mixed up. Right, so now we get to this demo. Just bear with me. So remember when I showed you in that drop down, the bottom one on premises was ADFS. Now that will go and generate a sample for you exactly the same as the one that I showed you earlier. Unfortunately, it uses WS Federation. So all you have to do, if you go and look in the sample, this was the code that was there. So use WS Federation with WS Federation parameters, and if you've ever looked at WS Federation, those will ring some bells for you. And I've simply changed that to use OpenID Connect authentication with the OpenID parameters. And in the web.config, I've taken out the Azure AD stuff, and I've added in the discovery doc and the client ID. And that will work for OpenID Connect. So even if you want to do Visual Studio to go and generate stuff for ADFS, it's really only about 15 lines of code to go and change it. So all the samples that you're seeing today are all from Azure AD sample directory that is up on GitHub. I haven't changed anything so that you can just go and run all these samples yourself. So there's nothing that I've actually done specifically other than this example. You can go and do it all yourself. Okay, so there's that one. And we are back here. Right, so native devices. So now here is where we are going off into the world of ADL. So now you've looked at code that said use, app.use, Owen, app.use, WSFed, or whatever. When we look at a native device, we are heading off into the world of Owen. So this is a WPF application. You can see there's XAML and all kinds of stuff. Look in the app.config. All right, so you should be familiar with the stuff now, client IDs and redirect URLs and all that good stuff. If we go and look in the code, what we'll see at the top, we start off with an authentication context, and then we come and we get authentication context dot, and then you get acquire token. There's a number of different ways of acquiring the token. You can force it from scratch. You can use what's in the cache. You can just, there's a whole lot of different overloads. You basically get the token, and then a little bit further down, you take the token over here, and you put it into an authorization header, and you set it up as a bearer token, and that's what you send to the web API. So that little bit of code, that literally 8 lines that I've just showed you, that's pretty much ADL, and that's pretty much all that you have to write. Okay? So if I now basically go and run this, so remember this is a WPF application. Okay, so now it's going to ask me to, I already have some in cache because I was practicing beforehand, so I'm going to clear the cache. It's going to ask me to sign in. I'm just going to whip over here and take the user from here, so I don't have to type it. Cool. I go back over here. Right. And type in the password. Okay, so what did you notice there? This is a native application. It has no browser functionality, and yet you've just seen a browser logon. So that's one of the other things that ADL does for you. It basically knows the platform that you're on, and it decides what the best way of giving you a browser user experience with a login and password key is. So that's all done by ADL. You don't have to write that code. All right, now this is just going to call a very simple add item, which is pretty trivial. And that's what it is, right? So it's just added the item. So ADL does all of this stuff for you. Very few lines of code. You get the access tokens. It does refresh tokens for you. It caches the stuff. It pops up browser screens or browser-like screen for authentication. All pretty cool stuff. Okay, so we are heading off into 20 minutes to go. So let me head off over here. Let me just check what we've done. Okay. Right, so a quick summary of the Owen versus the ADL. So remember, Owen is actually a protocol stack. ADL is a wrapper around a stack, which is currently OpenID Connect, but you're not supposed to know that. So that's what your Owen looks like. Set your cookie, use the authentication, app.use some kind of authentication with some kind of authentication options. That's literally the code. We go and look at ADL, which is for native devices. We just looked at that WPF application. Yeah. Set up some kind of authentication context. Where are we going to authenticate? What's the authority? Use that to do some kind of acquire token. There's a whole lot of different ones with the resource that we're going to. And again, very few lines of code. All right, so let's go something a little bit different. How many people here have ever used EasyAuth in Azure AD? Ah, Girish has done it, because we did it. How many people came to our B2C session yesterday? Ah, cool. So if we go and look at EasyAuth, So EasyAuth is like the great hidden secret in Azure AD. So we go off to an app service. So this is about websites now. So that's what we call app. That's what Azure calls app service these days. Okay. And I've got one here, EasyAuth app service, which I'm just going to load up. So I'm just going to show you here. There's not actually anything in this website. It's just a container, but it's good enough for this demo. If I go and Control F5 here, and let's see what happens. All right, it loads up, and you can see there is no, just hang on. There is no authentication, right? So we're going to change that. So we go off here to our, sorry, where is my portal gone? Oh, man. Murphy's Law. Okay, I'll just have to do that again. Come on. Has the internet gone down? What's happened? Oh, here we are. Yes, sorry. So EasyAuth app service. Over here, authentication and authorization. I click that. All right, so over here we see authentication authorization is a turnkey solution that lets you control access. I'm going to turn it on. All right, so you can see I've set this up already. If there's no authentication, log on with Azure. I configured it with the Express setting. The Express setting goes and makes an application for me in Azure AD. Much the same as Visual Studio. You don't have to do anything. Now I click Save. Okay, so it's saving my settings. Now if I go back to the application, if I can find it. And Viola, we have authentication. So what did I do there? I didn't write any code. I didn't download any NuGet libraries. I didn't use any features at all of authentication. All I did was about 4 mouse clicks to turn it on. The way it works is that in Azure, app services are actually running on IIS. And when you click that button, it's putting an IIS module in front of your application. Any requests to your application go to that module. If you're not authenticated, the module is sending you off to authenticate. So that's very cool. This authentication uses OpenID Connect and OAuth, by the way. If that works, it's fine. If it doesn't work, you've got a slight problem because you have no idea what's going on behind the scenes. So you can do the hard way, the OWIN, the web.config. It's a bit harder to do, but there's far more control when you want to debug it. Or you can do this way, which is really, really quick, mouse clicks, but when it goes wrong, yeah, it's a bit of a problem. So that's EasyAuth. For some reason, hardly anyone knows about it. But yeah, it's a really cool feature. Okay, so let's go back to the slides. Where's my clicker? Okay, so we've done EasyAuth. Right, now we're going to go way out on left field. So forget everything I've spoken about. Device profile is a new profile that's come up with Azure AD. It's not part of ADFS, and it's to do with IoT. Okay, so forget about everything. This is literally out here on left field. So the scenario for this is you've got an IoT device. So let's think of maybe a washing machine, a fridge. It's got some buttons. It's got that little LED that scrolls across maybe. And the serviceman rocks up. He wants to fix it. Now, he's got to have some way of getting in and pull these whizzy things like reflashing the EEPROMs and things, which he doesn't, obviously they don't want the public to do. So he needs to authenticate in some way. Okay, but it's a washing machine. It's a fridge. How do you authenticate with it, right? Obviously, this is one of these new ones. It's got internet capability. So what can we do on top of the washing machine or the fridge that has a screen and it's got a keyboard? And the answer is one of these, a mobile phone. So the device profile is about using a mobile phone to authenticate with an IoT object that has very basic internet capability. Okay, now the sample I'm going to show, like I said, it's straight out of the NuGet packages. It's a little bit over-egged for what I'm going to show you. Just need to use your imagination a little bit, but I didn't want to go and do any custom coding because then you can't go and run it yourselves. All right, so let me switch over. And we are back here. So the way this one works is I just run this. So we're just going to run up the build. Come on. Right. So what you will see from here is basically the guy coming and pushing a button or something on the fridge or the stove or the washing machine or whatever. So I need to enter a command because I say this is slightly over-egged. So this is the command that I'm going to use. So what's happening, or what's going to happen here, is it's sent off a command. The guy's pushed a button or something. It's sent a command after Azure AD using the internet capability. Now it comes back with this message. Everything in that message is coming from Azure. Nothing there is coming from your washing machine or your fridge. And it's saying, here's a URL for you. Maybe it's going on the scrolling stuff. And it's got a code. It says, use this code to authenticate. Okay? So cool. Let's go across here. This is the URL that it was talking about. Device login, enter the code that you've just received. Okay, so let's put the code in. There goes the code. Oh, well, it's coming up with permissions. Right. Do you trust this fridge? Do you trust this washing machine? Okay, we continue. And now the washing machine is going poll. Am I authenticated? I've already authenticated, so I just click sign in. Right, so I've signed in. It says, yes, you've signed in. You can now go back to your device. And now the washing machine's flashing something that, right, you've authenticated. You can refresh the EEPROM or you can do whatever you like. And if we look at that application, what it's done is it's displayed a whole lot of information. Okay, it's fridge and washing machine wouldn't do that, but you can see the flow. You're using simple internet connectivity to extend the function of IoT devices using OpenID Connect and OAuth. That's pretty cool. So I just thought I'd throw that in for a bit of fun. Okay. So we're coming up for the 50 minutes. We are indeed. All right, so some of the resources. Well, there's the Azure Active Directory Developers Guide. There's a ton of stuff in there. The code samples, which is the next one. Everything you saw today came from those code samples. I did not write any code. So you can go and do exactly what you saw today from those code samples. Now, some of the slides came from some of the sessions at Ignite in Atlanta. Secure your web applications and secure your native and mobile applications were two sessions that were given by a gentleman called Vittorio Bertucci, who has written the only book in the world on the subject. You can go and look at it on Microsoft Press. It's called Authenticating Modern Applications, and it's by Vittorio Bertucci. He's the principal program manager in the identity section at Microsoft. And if you can remember back to the days of Windows Identity Foundation, he's the guy who wrote that book as well. So, a legend. He's a big Italian guy, and he's got a long hair, and he always has a pigtail. And when he walks into a session, he starts, "Buongiorno!" And everyone like stops and listens to him. There's another guy who did the Active Directory stuff from Ignite. His name is Sam Dev. He is the group program manager in ADFS. So just to tell you, this guy's been working with ADFS for years. His Twitter handle is Mr. ADFS. So I reckon if you've got a Twitter handle of Mr. ADFS, you've got to be pretty confident that you know what you're talking about. In that server ADFS development, there's a whole lot of samples that they're building up. They'll keep adding to it, but you can see all the stuff I showed you is in those samples. The guide to OAuth grants has got stuff, and there's the NuGet Packet Explorer. Like I say, you can do tons of stuff with NuGet. I really recommend you go and have a look at it. The identity sessions that we've got at Ignite this year. So we had the B2C session yesterday that some of you came to. There was a session later on that day with Mark Rhodes, which was about identity and Azure AD Connect and all that kind of stuff. There's a deep dive earlier today. There's this session, and there's a session tomorrow about passwordless authentication. So go and watch that if you're interested in identity. Okay, so that's pretty much the end of my story. Please give us your evaluations. There's some cool prizes. Thank you very much for coming to the session. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something. And enjoy the rest of Ignite. If anyone's got some questions, we've got about 8 minutes.